Hey guys, tonight we begin with a flower that blooms like innocence but burns down empires. It's not a myth or metaphor, it's real. It's pale, sticky, and smells faintly of surrender. Opium didn't just ruin lives, it unraveled dynasties, rewrote borders, and turned one of the world's greatest civilizations into a cautionary tale whispered through silk curtains and gun smoke. You don't invade China with soldiers. You do it with poppies. So before you get too cozy, take a second to gently tap that new hype button YouTube just added. It really does help little guys like me push through the algorithm. And be sure to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy this strange little corner of quiet storytelling. Drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is for you. It's strangely comforting to know who else is drifting off with us around the world. Now, get comfortable, let the day melt away, and we'll drift back together into the quiet corners of the past. You wake up coughing. Again. The air in your village smells like wet wood and someone else's livestock. Your grandmother says it's the wind. Your uncle blames ghosts. But you suspect it's just the communal latrine sitting a bit too close to the cooking fire. The pigs don't mind. You do. You get up anyway, feet cold against the dirt floor, and you start the day the way you always do, by trying not to be noticed by anyone with a title. You're a peasant in Qing Dynasty China. This means a few things are guaranteed. Your back hurts, your bowl is never full, and your taxes are always due. The emperor lives hundreds of miles away, in a palace with names like Hall of Supreme Harmony and Pavilion of Eternal Longevity. You live in a structure that could politely be described as roof adjacent. Occasionally, a minor official rides through on a horse, trailing silk and indifference. He announces something vague about stability and harmony, collects silver, and disappears. The only harmony you experience is when the frogs croak in sync after it rains. Still, there's beauty here. The rice paddies gleam in the early morning, and the mountains in the distance look like something from a scholar's ink painting. Your mother sometimes hums while sorting beans, and on New Year's, your little sister lights a red paper lantern that floats just high enough to feel like a small rebellion against everything heavy and earthbound. But most days are quiet. The kind of quiet that comes from having absolutely no say in anything that happens to you. You till the land someone else owns, bow to people who wouldn't bother remembering your name, and pay taxes in 3 dimensions: grain, labor, and fear. You've never seen a British person, but you've heard rumors. Something about red hair, long noses, and strange smells. They arrive on ships with names like Resolution and Clyde, and they want tea, lots of tea. You grow the leaves but can't afford to drink them. A merchant once gave you a damp pouch of rejects. You boiled it 6 times, still better than the stream water. You don't understand international trade, but you do understand that prices are going up and rice is getting scarce. The elders mutter about bad omens and celestial imbalance. You think it's more likely that someone in the capital made a spreadsheet-shaped mistake. Not that anyone's keeping spreadsheets. They're keeping ledgers, heavy ones, balanced on the backs of people like you. One day, a traveler passes through your village. He carries a strange pipe and a half-broken compass. He smells like spices and something sweeter, a little rotted, a little warm. He trades trinkets for eggs and mutters about dreams that feel like flying. You watch as he takes out a brown lump, burns it, and breathes in like he's kissing the gods. He offers it to a local drunk who hasn't smiled in years. Within minutes, the man is laughing at chickens. You don't know what it is, but you know it's going to spread. No one tells you when the empire starts to splinter. There's no announcement, no official proclamation. Things just begin to feel off. The harvest is weaker. The river floods at the wrong time. Someone in the neighboring village gets arrested for asking where the tax money goes. You hear that the emperor has issued a new edict against corruption, which is the imperial equivalent of saying, "Stop that," into a hurricane. The tax collector starts arriving with soldiers. You consider hiding. You remember your walls are made of reeds. In the rare moments you can sit down, you wonder if the empire even knows you exist. Not in a poetic, lonely way. In a logistical, census-skipping, rice-evaporating kind of way. You are born into a system designed to function only if no one asks questions. And when they do, those questions disappear, usually along with the asker. But you survive. Not because the empire helps you, but because your grandmother still remembers which plants won't kill you if boiled long enough. Because your neighbors will share a fish if you share your onions. Because in a world that feels like it's creaking under its own ornate ceiling, the poor are excellent at finding cracks to slip through. You don't know it yet, but your entire country is about to be forced into a transaction it didn't ask for. One that begins in the poppy fields of India and ends in the bones of men like you. Your empire, so proud of its ancient walls and golden thrones, will be sold by the ounce, smoked in silence, and paid for in blood. But for now, the wind blows through the valley, the pigs grunt at the fire, and you tighten your straw sandals, preparing to work another field that will never truly be yours. A poppy doesn't look like it's planning anything. It's soft, orange-red, kind of floppy in the wind. You'd put it in your grandmother's hair or paint it in the corner of a scroll. But deep inside that delicate little bloom is a sticky, milky sap. And inside that sap is a chemical that makes people forget they're in pain and hunger and debt. And eventually, countries. You're not supposed to know any of this. You're a farmer, a fisherman, a pot mender, whatever someone else needs you to be. But the flower knows, and more importantly, the British know, specifically the ones in waistcoats and complicated hats. They're not soldiers, not yet. They're clerks, accountants, men with pens and ledgers and a sense of entitlement you can feel from across the dock. They speak in clipped tones and talk about balance sheets as if the world were a bank account. What they don't have is silver, which is awkward because China has rules. You don't trade tea, silk, or porcelain for vibes and a handshake. You want the good stuff. You pay in cold, hard, shiny silver. That's the deal. No haggling, no exceptions. Britain, unfortunately, is developing a bit of a tea habit, and by habit, we mean national dependency. English mornings start with tea. So do afternoons, evenings, funerals, political meetings, and vaguely polite arguments about sheep. There's no empire without tea, and there's no tea without China. And China, to Britain's horror, doesn't want anything Britain makes. Not wool, not clocks, not even politely condescending attitudes. Nothing. So they find a workaround, a lowercase solution to an uppercase problem. It grows in India, blooms quickly, and when processed properly, makes people forget their problems, and sometimes their names. Opium. It's technically medicine, but so is arsenic, depending on your goals. The British East India Company, a business so powerful it makes its own army, starts growing it on a massive scale, then shipping it across the sea. And suddenly, the poppy is on a boat, in a crate, under a tarp, floating straight into the mouth of the dragon. At first, it's quiet. A few traders here and there, small exchanges, nothing the empire notices. The Qing court is more concerned with courtly poetry and making sure no one builds anything taller than the emperor's hat. But the poppy spreads. It always does. Through port cities, through riverbanks, through whispers in smoky rooms. You hear that someone's cousin found relief for his cough. Then you hear that someone's brother stopped showing up to work. Then you notice that your neighbor's eyes don't quite focus anymore, and the tax collector smells like burnt sugar. The clerks are pleased. Silver is flowing again, this time in reverse. China is buying opium by the ton. The British are sipping tea with the kind of smugness that comes from profiting off a problem you caused. The emperor, to his credit, eventually notices. But by then, it's less of a leak and more of a flood. A slow, sweet flood that makes you feel warm and weightless just long enough to forget that your empire is being hollowed out from the inside. And here's the clever part. Opium doesn't come with an invoice. It doesn't march through the gates with a flag. It sneaks in. It smiles. It helps your cough. It helps your nerves. It helps your enemies quietly dismantle your economy without firing a shot. You don't even know you're losing until you wake up in a country that can't function without the very thing destroying it. One afternoon, you watch a ship unload near the Pearl River. The crates are unmarked, but everyone knows what's inside. A boy no older than your nephew slips one brick into a satchel and disappears into the alleys. He's gone before the official even finishes yawning. Later, you see him lying under a lantern, eyes closed, face slack. The world somewhere far, far away. The poppy has bloomed in his blood now. He doesn't look like he's coming back. No cannons, no soldiers, just a flower, a plan, and a ledger balanced on addiction. And the war hasn't even started, yet. You're building a fence out of bamboo and twine while, half a world away, some Scottish teenager is building a steam engine in his backyard. He'll name it something scientific. Yours falls over when the goat sneezes. It's not your fault. You're living in a country that still thinks the height of modern innovation is a slightly more poetic way to fold tax records. There are rumors of machines that spin cotton, boats that move without sails, and guns that reload before you can even curse. You've never seen any of these things, but you have seen a clerk spend 20 minutes drawing a perfect circle with a horsehair brush so the magistrate can stamp it and approve nothing. The Qing Empire is old, like storybook old. It runs on rituals, hierarchies, and the quiet panic of junior officials forgetting which seal goes on which scroll. In the capital, people still argue over the placement of celestial symbols while the British are figuring out how to lay underwater telegraph cables. You've seen a map once, an imperial one, and it places China firmly at the center of the world, massive and proud, while the rest of the continents sort of politely orbit around it like less successful cousins. It's comforting, in the same way a rusty lock on a barn door is comforting during a hurricane. Everything is about form. Every decision must pass through so many layers of bureaucracy that by the time it reaches someone with real power, the problem it was meant to solve has either solved itself, caught fire, or been renamed to avoid embarrassment. There are ministries for salt, ministries for rivers, ministries that exist solely to oversee other ministries. You imagine there's probably a department for counting the number of departments. You get a headache just thinking about it. The Forbidden City, from the right angle, looks like it could conquer the world. Golden roofs, marble courtyards, guards in peacock feather hats. But the walls don't move. The palaces don't think. And the men inside are mostly concerned with poetry competitions, eunuch gossip, and whether someone is bowing too quickly or not quickly enough. You suspect the emperor has never touched a shovel, or made a decision not pre-approved by 12 ancestors and a dragon-shaped stamp. The dynasty rules like it's afraid of change because it is. Change means loss of control, and the one thing an empire built on deference and delicate paper trails cannot tolerate is improvisation. Meanwhile, Europe is bursting at the seams with coal smoke, dirty fingers, and dangerous ideas. Factories scream through the night, printing cloth faster than silkworms can blink. Railways carve up the countryside like veins, feeding cities that double in size every year. England, France, even awkward little Prussia, they're all sprinting towards something loud and new. You'd think the Qing might notice. But instead, a messenger brings word from the provincial capital. Your village has failed to deliver enough firewood for the midwinter tribute. You consider explaining that half the trees are gone because the river flooded. But the messenger just hands you a document with 5 red stamps and rides off. You're not against tradition. Traditions are nice. They tell you who you are, who your father was, and why your cousin isn't allowed to marry that girl from the neighboring province. But when tradition turns into superstition, wrapped in red tape, you start to wonder if maybe there's a better way to run things. You bring this up to your uncle once. He laughs, says, "Better is dangerous." Better gets you noticed. Noticed gets you reassigned to the borderlands. Some people try. Reform-minded scholars send in memorials begging for modern schools, better roads, foreign science. Most of those memorials are politely shelved under things that make people nervous. Occasionally, one makes it through, and you hear a rumor that someone in the court has ordered a telescope. But when it arrives, no one knows how to use it, and someone accidentally points it at a concubine's bath chamber. That ends the astronomy program. The empire keeps spinning on ceremony, a vast machine powered by ink, incense, and inertia. You can't eat inertia. It doesn't irrigate your crops. It doesn't stop British ships from docking with things you've never seen before, like clocks with gears and guns that reload without prayer. You don't know much about foreign wars, but you know what happens when someone builds a better plow and your leaders don't even know how to hold it. Somewhere, in a red-draped chamber lined with jade lions and embroidered screens, an imperial advisor is explaining that modernization is disruptive, that China must remain pure, that the West will come and go, like all barbarians before. You wonder if he's ever seen a steam engine, or a battleship, or the eyes of a merchant who knows your empire needs his product more. Then he needs your permission. The world is moving, your empire is not, and the ground beneath your feet is starting to hum. You think tea is harmless, until you realize entire empires will reorganize their navies for it. Not even the good kind. Not jasmine or pu'er, just the plain brownish stuff that tastes like wet bark unless you add milk and sugar. But in Britain, it's holy. It's breakfast. It's politics, medicine, identity. It's how you apologize and how you end wars. It's how you start them too, if necessary. The British East India Company, part business, part government, part extremely pushy neighbor, starts with trade. At first, it's honest. Buy tea from China, ship it home, make a tidy profit. But then someone does the math. Tea is expensive. China only accepts silver. Britain doesn't have silver. Britain has India. And that's when things get interesting. You're standing on a dock in Canton, watching British ships unload crates. They're labeled vaguely, like everything they do. Medical supplies, merchant goods, pigeons? But no, it's opium. Again, it always is. You don't say anything. No one does. Not the clerks, not the local officials, not the harbor workers watching their sons fall asleep at midday for the third time this week. The logic is simple. Britain wants tea. China wants silver. Britain sells opium in China to get silver, then uses the silver to buy tea, then ships the tea back to England to feed its national addiction. You could call it trade, but it feels more like laundering, through a teapot. In London, tea is practically its own food group. It's part of the ceremony of being alive. You're born, you cry. Someone offers the midwife a cup of tea. You die, they do the same for the priest. Everything in between is just variations of boiling water and mild disappointment. Afternoon tea, high tea, cream tea, tea dances. Queen Victoria once delayed a military parade because she hadn't finished hers. You don't know who Victoria is yet, but she's going to be your problem soon. Every cup poured in a tidy English parlor represents a brick of opium sold under a lantern in some Canton alley. There's no tea party without someone else's son nodding off on a straw mat. But that's not part of the conversation. The British talk about trade routes, fair markets, civilizing missions. They don't talk about smoke curling through the rafters of a Qing village home, or the way a man stops caring about food once he's had his third pipe. That's not economics, that's just regrettable. Back in China, you notice the tea prices have dropped. There's more foreign money floating around. Some of your neighbors are buying imported cloth, new inkstones, polished mirrors that reflect just a little too clearly. But the markets feel wrong. The balance has shifted. The old ways, rice in, tax out, are being bent around a new axis. An opium axis. You hear stories of merchants getting rich overnight, of officials looking the other way, of quiet deaths no one investigates because the families stopped asking for help a long time ago. The British, meanwhile, are delighted. Their balance of trade flips. Suddenly, they're the ones in control. Every cup of Earl Grey is a victory. Every successful shipment of opium is a checkmate on a board. China didn't even know it was playing. You try explaining this to someone, a cousin, a friend, but it doesn't land. Too abstract, too distant. What does British tea have to do with your uncle's missing cart or the temple elder who sold his land? Everything, actually, because this isn't just about tea, it's about pride, control. Who decides what a life is worth? You used to think wars were fought over territory, borders, insults. Now you're learning they can be fought over leaf water. If the leaf is valuable enough, if the addiction is strong enough, and if the people at the top decide the ones at the bottom are just another number on the ledger. You think tea is harmless. So does everyone at first. Then a navy shows up. It's always the same port, always the same narrow slice of coastline, sweating under the subtropical sun, where boats creak against the docks, and arguments happen in 5 languages at once. Canton, the only place in all of China where foreign merchants are allowed to do business, and even then, only for part of the year, only through government-approved middlemen, and only if they follow rules that feel like they were designed by a Confucian scholar with a personal grudge against common sense. You don't live in Canton, but you've seen its shadows stretch across the countryside. Its tea leaves and silks pass through your village on slow ox carts. The men who load and unload them return home richer or ruined. It's the kind of place where fortunes are made in back rooms and unmade in front of magistrates. You've heard about the Hong's Chinese, merchant houses licensed to deal with foreigners. Each one, like a tiny empire of ledgers and lanterns, always watched, never trusted. The system is called the Canton system, which sounds like a clever strategy until you realize it's held together by suspicion, paperwork, and the imperial assumption that foreigners are fundamentally unserious people who need to be contained in small, manageable doses. The British, in particular, are not thrilled. They don't like being told where to dock, when to trade, or how loud their cannon salutes can be. And yet, every season, they come back, because Canton has tea, and porcelain, and silks that don't unravel in the rain. So they hold their noses, write their petitions, and stew quietly, while pretending not to notice how heavily they're being taxed. On the Chinese side, there's a sense of control, an elegant illusion. The empire dictates terms, sets prices, decides when the trading season begins and when it ends. Foreigners are not allowed inland. They cannot speak directly to officials. They live in a designated row of houses known as the factories, which contain no factories, just merchants, maps, and men sweating through their waistcoats, trying not to offend anyone important. It's containment disguised as hospitality. But under the surface, the system is cracking. You can feel it in the way local officials start looking the other way, in how opium bricks begin arriving in crates labeled Indian rhubarb, in the growing number of coastal villages reporting strange ships anchored just offshore, their cannons polished, their captains increasingly impatient. The British merchants are getting restless. They hate being told no. They especially hate being told no by people they don't consider equals. One day, you hear a rumor. A British trader insulted a Hong merchant and threw a teacup at a wall. Another says a Chinese official accused a British ship of smuggling and refused it entry. No one can agree on the details, but the mood shifts. The port is tense. There are more guards, fewer smiles. The system, once brittle, is now clearly broken, not with a bang, but with a long, anxious wheeze. The kind of sound you hear when someone realizes their rules no longer matter to the people who've learned how to get around them. The British want free trade. That's the phrase they keep repeating. Free trade. It sounds noble until you realize it means we want to sell opium to anyone, anywhere, whenever we feel like it. The Qing government says no, so the merchants go home and write angry letters to Parliament. The letters become speeches, the speeches become policies, and the policies, eventually, start looking a lot like war plans. From your village it seems absurd that a single port, a handful of hongs, and some crates of dried leaves could trigger this much international outrage. But you're learning that economics is just politics with extra steps, that control, once tasted, is never surrendered quietly, and that sometimes the easiest way to end a fragile system is to insist that it's the only thing holding the world together. The Canton system was meant to preserve order. Instead, it paints a target, and someone, somewhere, is already loading the cannon. They don't kick down doors. They don't flash gold chains or spray bullets in alleys. They host garden parties. They wear powdered wigs and embroidered waistcoats and talk about margins over Madeira. And yet, they're running one of the most profitable drug operations in the history of human civilization. You just don't call it a cartel when the men behind it have seats in Parliament. The British East India Company, at first glance, looks like something harmless, like a collection of overly polite men with monocles and too many vowels in their last names. They print their own currency. They have their own army. Their ships fly a flag that's almost but not quite the British flag. And if you're not paying attention, you might mistake them for a particularly aggressive tea club. But behind the linen gloves and polite accents is a machine with a single goal: profit. Not growth, not charity, not civilization, just profit. And opium is profitable. You don't see them out here, in the fields of Bengal, where poppies bloom in tightly ordered rows and farmers work like their lives depend on it, because they do. The company doesn't grow the opium directly. That would be inelegant. It leases the land, controls the auctions, sets the prices, and makes sure the people doing the actual work are too deep in debt to stop. It calls this administration. The farmers call it something else. You'd call it empire, with a smile and a ledger. The raw opium is packed and pressed, marked with stamps, and loaded onto ships. Not hidden, not smuggled. There are no secret compartments or bribed border guards. This is open, industrial-scale trafficking, papered over with trade, licenses, and colonial authority. The company doesn't need to sneak. It has charters signed by kings. The journey from India to China is smooth. The British Navy protects the shipping routes. The ports are predictable. And Canton, that reluctant little window into China, accepts the cargo without too many questions. Officially, opium is banned. Unofficially, it's the worst-kept secret on the Pearl River. It arrives in crates, moves through warehouses, trickles into pipes, and dissolves into bloodstreams. The company doesn't care what happens after the sale. They've made their cut. The rest is someone else's collapse. You don't know these men by name, but they're deciding what happens to your village. They sit in drawing rooms in London, sipping the very tea their opium-funded silver pays for, and debate whether to increase production. They don't see the addicts. They don't see the broken families or the burned-out merchants. They see graphs, numbers, demand, curves that slope conveniently upward. Occasionally, someone in the company says the quiet part too loudly. That opium is a necessary evil. That trade must flow. That China's refusal to buy British goods left them no choice. These men argue that civilization requires hard choices. They say this while lounging on velvet, beneath portraits of their own ancestors. You wonder how many hard choices involve someone else losing their teeth to addiction. The company calls itself a facilitator, a middleman. It claims to bring order to chaos, but you're starting to see the pattern. The chaos, more often than not, arrives precisely where their order has been installed. They don't conquer with flags, they conquer with contracts. And once the ink dries, it's not bayonets that keep you in line, it's debt. You hear that the emperor is angry, that a new official has been sent to Canton to crack down. But even that feels too late, because the company isn't a country. It's a ghost in silk gloves. It doesn't care who rules China, only that someone pays on time. And if the current dynasty can't do that, well, history is full of other options. You used to think the opium came from nowhere, that it was just another curse drifting in with the tide. Now you see the ships. Now you see the men behind them. They don't look like criminals. They look like guests at a wedding you weren't invited to. And they smile as they sell the thing that's already eating your country from the inside out. You hear about it before you see it. Whispers in the market. A cousin's neighbor with a persistent cough that suddenly disappeared. A traveling scholar who says his thoughts no longer swirl like mud after just a few pipes. It's medicine, they say. Calming, soothing, sacred, almost. And you believe it because you want to, because something in your body aches most days, and you're not entirely sure which part. At first, it's small, a dark, sticky ball of resin in a paper twist, tucked neatly in the pouch of a merchant with unusually steady hands. He says it came from India, that it's used by doctors, which is a sentence you've learned to interpret loosely. He doesn't charge for the first pipe. That would be bad business. Instead, he lights it for you, hands you the stem, smiles as you inhale. It hits like a warm robe draped over your nerves. The corners of the world round off. Sounds dull. Worries drift into the rafters like smoke. You forget, for a moment, that your roof leaks, that your landlord is a tyrant, and that your brother hasn't spoken since the flood. You just float. The next day, your throat feels strange but not painful, just unfinished. The merchant is still there. This time, the pipe isn't free, but it's cheap enough, and you've skipped lunch for worse reasons. A few coins later, you're back under the blanket, drifting. And just like that, a habit forms. Not a loud one. It's quiet, polite. You still work, still nod to your neighbors, still sweep the floor of the temple. But now you count the hours in smokes, not meals. You're not alone. The porters, the clerks, the tailors, they're all taking it. Some hide it better. Others stop pretending. In the alleys near the dock, people sit for hours in silence, their eyes half-lidded, their lives paused. You hear a child call her father by name, and he doesn't answer, just exhales a long ribboned plume that looks almost beautiful until it fades. No one talks about addiction. That's not a word you use. You call it a little help, a nightcap, something for the nerves. You tell yourself it's still medicine, that it's only temporary, that you can stop whenever you like. But when a storm washes out the next shipment and the price triples, you pay anyway. When your cousin starts selling her hairpins to keep her husband from shaking, you look away, because you're starting to feel it too, that tightening in your chest when it's been too long, that throb in the skull that only softens with smoke. The merchants know. They can see it in your eyes, in the way your hands tremble slightly as you count your coins. They never raise their voices, never need to. They just raise the price, and you always find a way to meet it. Pawn a robe, skip a debt payment. Convince yourself you're still in control, because you only do it twice a day now, not 3. The local magistrate issues a proclamation. Opium is banned. Again, it's immoral, it's unclean. It destroys the soul and weakens the people. He says this with a straight face, knowing full well his nephew runs one of the larger dens on the street. The law is loud, the enforcement is tired. You don't think of yourself as addicted. That's for the desperate, the sickly, the ones who've stopped bathing. You still walk upright. You still smile. You still offer incense at the ancestral shrine. But sometimes, when the pipe is empty and the night stretches long, you wonder what it used to feel like to be awake without smoke behind your eyes. This is how it spreads. Not with armies, not with banners, but with quiet cravings and the illusion of choice. One taste at a time, one village at a time, until the flower roots itself in the veins of an empire too proud to admit it's bleeding. You'd like to think the emperor knows what he's doing. After all, he wears the dragon robe. He lives behind the vermilion walls. He has a throne, a title, and more ancestral pressure than any one man should reasonably bear. His edicts come carved in gold, whispered by eunuchs, sealed in lacquer. He commands the mandate of heaven. And yet, when it comes to opium, he's about as effective as a paper umbrella in a monsoon. Jia Qing, your emperor, technically wants to fix things. He really does. He signs declarations, scowls meaningfully at reports, and sends increasingly angry letters to provincial governors, asking why the coastal towns smell like incense and disappointment. On paper, he bans opium outright, twice, maybe 3 times. You lose count. Each ban is written with a little more urgency, a little more rhetorical thunder. The court applauds. Ministers nod solemnly, and then they go home and take the edge off with a pipe. It's not that Jia Qing is weak. He's just in a system that refuses to listen unless there's a bribe tucked into the message. His father, the Qianlong emperor, ruled for 60 years and treated bureaucracy like an art form. Jia Qing inherited that machinery, every gear, every crank, every official who's been in power long enough to become a minor deity in their district. He tries to pull the levers, but nothing moves. He pushes against the tide and finds himself ankle-deep in luxury and whispers. You hear the stories. Everyone does. Ministers showing up to court with the red of their eyes barely masked by powder. Servants instructed to swap the incense in the antechambers with something smoother. Imperial cousins disappearing for weeks, only to return thinner, paler, and suspiciously mellow. And all the while, the emperor talks about moral decay and the importance of traditional virtue. You don't envy him. He's trying to sweep out a flood with a calligraphy brush. There's a theater to it. The palace issues grand proclamations condemning the foreign merchants. Barbarians, they call them, as though name-calling will plug the holes in the levee. You read one of these edicts once, nailed to the side of a tea house. It compared opium to poison, rot, and spiritual erosion. You agreed with it, mostly. But then you saw the owner of that same tea house lighting up behind the counter 10 minutes later. So, the emperor isn't blind. He knows what's happening. But every time he sends out a new inspector, that inspector comes back richer, quieter, and suddenly very interested in the benefits of moderation. The court is a house with termites, and every new appointee just learns to walk carefully across the hollow spots. Sometimes you wonder if Jia Qing has tried it himself, just once. A ceremonial taste, a pipe offered by a courtier he can't afford to offend. It wouldn't be shocking. You've seen stronger men give in for less. It wouldn't make him evil, just tired, just human. And maybe that's the worst part of all, because you want your emperor to be untouchable. You want him to stand above the rot, to be the last unburned page in a library gone up in smoke. But instead, you watch him flail eloquently, expensively, and in total futility. His orders echo, his reforms stall, his warnings grow sharper, but his grip on power stays soft, like trying to strangle a snake made of steam. Eventually, a new memo arrives from the palace, another crackdown, another promise. This time, they say, it will be different. This time, the empire will purge the corruption, burn the dens, punish the traitors. You nod. Everyone nods. Then someone asks if the local supplier is still open. And you all drift back into the silence, that follows too many broken declarations. In the capital, the emperor writes one more edict, signs it with shaking hands, and wonders if the mandate of heaven includes a refund policy. Lin Zexu arrives with the posture of a man who still believes paperwork can stop bullets. His robes are crisp, his brushstrokes elegant, his moral spine, regrettably, is intact. You don't know whether to admire him or pity him. In a sea of corruption and compromise, he's a pillar. Unfortunately, pillars are easy to spot and easier to knock over. He's appointed imperial commissioner, which is a fancy way of saying, you get to clean up the mess everyone else keeps stepping around. You watch him step off the boat in Canton with a face carved from granite. Not the smug kind, the tired kind. The kind that says he's read too many reports and burned too many letters that begin with, my humble apologies. But he doesn't bow to local merchants. He doesn't accept gifts. That alone is enough to make half the port start sweating. He doesn't pace. He marches. Within days, he bans opium outright again, but this time like he means it. No more quiet confiscations. No more bribes tucked into bamboo scroll cases. He wants the opium surrendered, burned, gone. The local officials, who had spent years perfecting the art of looking busy while doing nothing, begin to panic. Lin does not smile. He does not stall. He sends notices to foreign merchants, especially the British, with all the warmth of a guillotine invitation. And here's where it gets impressive. It works. At first, thousands of chests of opium are turned over. Not voluntarily, exactly, but decisively. Lin seizes over 20,000 barrels of it and dumps them into the sea like he's auditioning for a historical reenactment of moral clarity. Workers build massive trenches on the beach. Lime is poured. Salt water floods the pits. The air reeks for days, a bitter perfume of righteousness and rot. And for one brief moment, the empire exhales. You'd cheer if you weren't waiting for the other shoe to drop. Because this doesn't just destroy opium, it destroys profit. British merchants had grown used to selling addiction and collecting silver without anyone important telling them no. Now one man, just one, has flipped their entire operation into a liability. You can practically hear the British monocles crack from here. Back in London, Lin Zexu's name is pronounced with increasing irritation. Parliament debates whether this is a trade violation, an act of war, or just a really inconvenient example of China minding its own business. The answer, predictably, is all three. The East India Company throws a quiet tantrum in the form of very expensive lobbying, and just like that, warships start preparing to sail. Meanwhile, Lin writes letters, beautiful ones, long, scathing, poetic indictments of foreign greed. He tells Queen Victoria, yes, personally, that her merchants are poisoning his people. He asks, almost politely, how she'd feel if China sent drugs into English villages. He assumes she'll be moved by reason, or shame, or both. He assumes someone out there still reads words and changes course. You want to believe him. You want to think one principled man with calligraphy and conviction can stop an empire. But history doesn't tend to reward idealism, not when cannons are involved. And Lin, despite all his brilliance, is playing defense on a board already carved by British hands. Still, he holds his ground. For a little while, he's the last bureaucrat who doesn't fold, doesn't bend, doesn't sell out for a percentage of the cargo. He's the one who tries. And that, tragically, is what makes him dangerous. Because now, the British have a reason, a face, a name, and an excuse to bring the war they've been quietly designing for years. You hear the rumors of ships setting sail. You see new maps being drawn with wider borders and narrower patience. And somewhere, Lin Zexu sharpens his brush, unaware that he's about to be swept into the history books under a chapter titled, Too Good for the Job. The beach at Human doesn't smell like revolution. It smells like rot and salt, and something darker underneath, something pungent enough to sting your eyes if the wind shifts wrong. You stand with a crowd, shoulder to shoulder, staring at ditches so wide they might as well be graves, and in a way they are. Just not for people, for profit, for control, for illusion. The opium chests arrive in long lines, escorted like criminals. Some are dragged, some are carried with care, as if they still deserve respect. Each one bears the marks of foreign merchants, stamped and sealed with names that once meant wealth and now mean liability. The soldiers open them without ceremony. They pry the lids, dump the bricks, break the seals, and toss the remnants into the lime pits like yesterday's lies. And the crowd cheers, not wildly, not like a festival. It's the kind of cheer that comes from deep weariness, the kind that says, finally, someone is doing something. Lin Zexu stands nearby, not gloating, not waving banners, but watching, focused, controlled, as if the fumes can't touch him. You don't see pride on his face, exactly more like a silent ledger being balanced in his mind. An old debt paid, an older one just beginning. The operation lasts days, thousands of chests broken down, opium turned to sludge, to muck, to useless waste. Laborers work in shifts, guards line the perimeter. Officials take notes, because if history ever questions what happened here, they'll have the records to prove it wasn't just symbolic. This was thorough, intentional. You watch as streams of tainted water snake toward the bay. The sea, patient and indifferent, takes it all. You know what this costs, not in silver, though that number floats through the air like smoke millions, but in consequences, because this isn't just product being destroyed, it's diplomacy, it's property, and property, when British, apparently has feelings. London will call this destruction an insult, an affront to decency, a reason to send ships with names like Nemesis. You wonder if those ships will arrive with tea or with cannons. Still, for now, this feels like justice. Strange, temporary justice. You've seen too many neighbors sink under the weight of a pipe, watched too many merchants exchange shame for silver. And now, here it is, dissolving in the open sun, bitterness made visible. You breathe deep, even though the air bites back. A British representative protests. Of course he does. He says this is a violation of trade agreements, that it's theft. You think about the irony for a moment, then let it go. The man's face is red, his voice a little too high. He's used to being obeyed, not ignored. Lin listens, nods, then gestures calmly toward another wagon of chests. The message is clear. You brought poison. We're sending it back through the earth. No gunfire, no battles. Just mud and lime and methodical unmaking. But even as you watch the last brick crumble, you can feel the weight of what's coming. You've read enough history to know that empires rarely appreciate being flushed, especially not by the people they were planning to lecture. Somewhere on the horizon, sails are being raised, speeches are being written, and Parliament is practicing outrage like it's a national sport. You try to stay in the moment. You try to hold on to the sight of something being undone before it destroys everything. You try to believe that an empire can say, enough, and mean it. That this one act unusually brave, strangely clean might matter. But the sea, in its quiet way, swallows the evidence. And as the tide creeps back over the sand, all you're left with is the faint, bitter smell of a war that hasn't officially started yet. The horizon darkens with sails before you even register the smell of gunpowder in the wind. It's polite at first, just a row of masts standing tall, flags snapping crisply, but there's a menace beneath the silk of the pennants. The British Navy has arrived, not for tea, not for trade. This is diplomacy with teeth, the sort that laughs politely while knocking the doors off your city. You stand on the riverbank, chest tight, watching ships slide through the water like iron sharks, their decks bristling with cannon and expectation. Men move with disciplined chaos. Muskets are polished until they gleam in the sun. Officers tilt their hats at a precise angle that says, "We own the situation." You can almost hear the click of gold buttons marking time, a cadence meant to intimidate, charm, and confuse all at once. And it works. A cannon fires for the first time, not a warning shot, not a symbolic gesture. A cannon fires to announce that this is serious. The sound rumbles through the city walls, a reminder that somewhere across the water, humans have discovered the ultimate combination of math, physics, and mischief. Birds scatter, windows rattle. Your stomach takes a private vacation down to your toes. You realize that all the warnings, letters, edicts, and moral arguments are suddenly irrelevant. Paper does not stop iron. Ink does not shield bricks. Opium dumps on human were righteous. They were spectacular. But they were also an invitation. And someone in London has been keeping score. The British officers walk the deck like they own the universe. They smile with teeth that glint like daggers. They wave politely to the distant officials on shore. You imagine that someone, somewhere, has typed a memo back home titled, "Chinese Denial, in Progress." The memo probably ended with a sad face. More cannons fire. Each one shakes the ground under your feet. You notice children gripping their mothers' skirts and mothers gripping theirs. Even the water seems nervous, slapping against the hulls as if it knows this is the beginning of a problem that will outlive all of you. Smoke curls into the sky in lazy spirals, carrying a faintly metallic tang that promises discomfort in your lungs and headaches in the morning. The river has become a theater of menace, the city its audience, and you, unwilling witness to the opening act. From the walls, someone tries diplomacy. Someone waves a flag. A voice shouts in careful tones. The British pause, nod politely, and fire again. It is as if manners themselves are weapons, wrapped neatly in canvas sails. You understand the pattern now. Polite speech, measured courtesy, and sudden explosive reminders of capacity. It's a lesson in power delivered in decibels. The local officials scramble, sending emissaries to meet the ships. They carry scrolls thick with argument, appeal, and threat, which the British receive with refined interest, then stack somewhere out of the way while they prepare their next barrage. The city braces, streets empty, merchants shutter windows. Teapots sit abandoned on counters as the horizon keeps rumbling closer. You've seen paperwork fail before. Now you see iron, discipline, and precise intent fail nobody. As night begins to fall, the ships anchor in deliberate formation. Cannons line the decks like predators at rest, eyes gleaming in the twilight. The river is a corridor of power, silvered in moonlight and threat. The city smells of smoke, salt, and anxiety that has settled into your bones. Somewhere on the horizon, you can swear the sea itself holds its breath, waiting for the next volley. And you understand suddenly that this is not negotiation. This is instruction. A very loud, very expensive, very unmistakable lecture in compliance. History will call it gunboat diplomacy. You call it everyone hold on to something heavy. The British have arrived with all the charm of a tea party and the subtlety of a thunderclap. The lesson is clear. Courtesy is impressive. Cannons are clearer. Cannons roar before anyone can even finish their morning tea. The horizon is a blur of smoke, sails, and sudden, sharp panic. You are on the riverbank, heart thudding, as the first salvo shakes the air, splintering wooden docks and sending seagulls into disoriented loops. China has prepared its forts with loyalty, faith, and gunpowder measured by yesterday's standards, which is to say, not enough. Britain has prepared with maps, mathematics, and more cannons than a small kingdom can reasonably process. Spoiler: this is going to end poorly. You watch soldiers scramble, their banners snapping in the wind, officers shouting orders that overlap like broken metronomes. The British ships glide closer, each hull a calculated threat, their discipline so exact it almost feels rude. Their guns fire with rhythm, like a drumbeat announcing that modernity has just arrived, and it has, brought a few tons of metal. You can feel the recoil in your bones and smell the acrid sting of war on the breeze. It is a lesson in asymmetry delivered in real time. China returns fire, or at least it tries. The cannons groan under ancient weight, the smoke choking more than it kills. You see men running to reload, slipping on wet stone, tripping over rope. A shot goes wild and lands in a rice field instead of the river, which will have consequences tomorrow. You watch the tide of the battle, not as a participant, but as someone fully aware that no amount of courage can fix obsolete technology. Honor is abundant. Accuracy is not. Onshore, emissaries wave white flags, attempting negotiation mid-barrage. The British wave back with polite expressions and more gunfire. Words are treated like confetti. Shots are treated like truth. Someone fires a cannon aimed at a small fort, and the brick wall shudders, cracking like it just heard the punchline to a very bad joke. You almost laugh until a soldier yells, and you remember gravity and gunpowder do not take sarcasm lightly. Boats are sunk. Bridges collapse. The river runs dark with smoke and debris. You notice the officers on both sides keeping meticulous logs. You wonder if they will ever reconcile what they've seen with the neat ink on paper. China has centuries of protocol and moral authority. Britain has a spreadsheet of firepower, with an emphasis on fire. The combination is devastating. You can almost hear history snickering at the futility of etiquette when cannons are involved. By midday, the forts are battered, the river cluttered, and the soldiers exhausted. Smoke hangs in heavy clouds, hiding the horizon and making the world feel compressed, intimate, terrifying. You see a British sailor polishing a cannon mid-battle, a man calmly adjusting his hat while shells scream overhead. The juxtaposition makes your stomach do unhelpful flips. Discipline looks absurd until you are the one hiding behind sandbags, counting every heartbeat. And still, China fights. They fight with everything they have: courage, pride, and a stubborn faith in the old ways. Men climb ramparts, reload, shout commands that may or may not reach anyone. You notice a general gesturing furiously, as if his anger alone could alter trajectory. It does not. It does not alter anything. Not the cannons, not the strategy, not the inevitable outcome. You feel the weight of inevitability settle like a stone in your chest. By evening, the British hold the river, their ships intact, their formation disciplined, their casualties surprisingly low. China has fought valiantly, yes, and dramatically, and in a way worthy of ink and scrolls. But valiance does not reload cannons fast enough, and drama does not repel steel. You watch as retreat becomes the only viable plan, as walls crumble and morale falters. The empire is bruised, confused, and increasingly aware that centuries of ritual cannot compete with organized, mechanized might. You stand on the bank, dirt under your nails, smoke in your lungs, and realize something fundamental. History is watching, and the empire just learned a lesson about modern warfare that it would not forget, no matter how much it preferred to. Some lessons you discover arrive with smoke, fire, and an audible groan of structural failure, and this one has arrived with a bang. You sit in a room heavy with lacquered wood, incense, and the faintly sour smell of anxiety, watching men in silk robes nod and bow and sign, as if their pens alone can seal the fate of millions. Every stroke feels like a drumbeat counting down the empire's dignity, and you can almost hear history whispering that nobody will ever forget this day. The British diplomats are immaculately calm, wigs perfectly aligned, quills scratching with the precision of a surgeon, and smiles that suggest they have already won even before the ink dries. You notice their posture: confident, relaxed. The kind of confidence born from knowing the other side desperately needs what you're offering. Hong Kong appears on the scroll, neatly printed in small characters, yet monumental in consequence. The city's fate is a line of ink, but the meaning is monumental. A harbor, a port, a foothold. You try to reconcile the reality that paper is replacing soldiers, that signatures now carry more power than centuries of walls, watchtowers, and brave men with gunpowder. You glance at the Chinese officials, their faces polite masks over tight jaws, a quiet fury contained only by centuries of protocol. They speak in measured tones, offer formal phrases of diplomacy and compromise, yet you know the truth they are losing, and the British know it. Each clause read aloud feels like a small chisel striking at the foundations of the empire. Trade rights, extraterritoriality, customs, tariffs, sovereignty, quietly shifting like sand beneath the imperial boots. The British nod at every protest, shake hands, and scribble. Their next request with such decorum that it almost feels like courtesy. And yet, every courtesy is a calculated conquest. Every polite smile, a reminder that you are watching your own influence dissolve. You almost envy the British calm. It's a serenity born of knowing that the world bends when your navy floats and your lawyers write. The empire's pride is being auctioned one article at a time, with men bowing politely to the process. A secretary passes around maps with new boundaries drawn in ink that might as well be lava. Ports are circled, seeded, or opened under foreign control. You see cities blink onto these papers as though someone is turning the lights out on them. The officials argue, but every argument is catalogued, filed, and politely ignored. You notice a British clerk doodling a crown in the margin, while the Chinese ministers discuss fiscal compensation. One of you is planning for centuries, the other is planning for lunch. The contrast is dizzying. You wonder whether history will remember the ink or the humiliation. Lunch arrives, or at least the idea of it. You watch as teacups clink gently while your empire's sovereignty quietly evaporates. The aroma of tea is sweet but hollow, like a courtesy that smells better than it tastes. British officers sip with calm, observing reactions, noting every hesitation. Every polite cough from the Chinese side is catalogued in some ledger that will long outlive the pens themselves. You feel the absurdity of it. Armies have been deployed, battles fought, lives risked, yet the real victory comes from polite conversation, a slight bow, a carefully written treaty. Civilization distilled into etiquette and clauses. Hours pass, scrolls pile, quills scratch. Hands shake slightly with exhaustion or anger. It's impossible to tell. Hong Kong is seated, ports open, tariffs adjusted. The room is filled with the quiet hum of inevitability. You notice someone mutter a phrase in classical Chinese that roughly translates to, "We are powerless, and we know it." And the British smile politely, as if they understand entirely and care not at all. The treaty ends. Hands are shaken. Guests are thanked. Men leave, and you realize that the empire has lost more than territory. It has lost the illusion of control, traded in broad daylight, with the same calm, polite efficiency with which one might swap a snack at tea. You step outside. The air is heavy with ink, smoke from the candles, and a subtle, insidious tension. The city remains, the people remain, the emperor remains, yet something has shifted. You know that history has recorded this moment as the first of many unequal treaties. Hong Kong is just the beginning, and as you walk along the river, watching boats glide under the fading sun, you feel a quiet, bitter comprehension. Sometimes diplomacy wins more than armies, and sometimes your friends and your ports disappear before you even realize the transaction has been made. You step out of the treaty hall and into streets that feel smaller. Somehow, though the city hasn't shrunk, the air tastes faintly of smoke, ink, and despair, a cocktail that lingers in your throat. Merchants haggle as they always have, but their voices carry an edge you haven't heard before, a nervous tremor that speaks to invisible debts and invisible masters. You notice the banners flapping over the market stalls, the red of loyalty and the yellow of tradition, both dulled now under the shadow of foreign cannons and diplomatic smiles. It is subtle, almost imperceptible, but everywhere. The empire knows that the rules have changed and that someone else gets to write the next chapter. The British, calm as surgeons, glide past with perfectly pressed coats and faintly condescending smiles, each step measured, deliberate, as if the city itself is merely a backdrop for their logistical genius. They leave behind a system of trade and influence that is polite enough to make you hate it, efficient enough to make you fear it. You watch officials bow and nod and pretend, and you realize that courtesy has become a weapon. Every gesture, a calculated arrow piercing centuries of imperial confidence. Meanwhile, the emperor signs letters and decrees in grand calligraphy. But the ink doesn't hide the truth. The world has moved forward while you were perfecting etiquette. Hong Kong is ceded, ports are opened, and treaties are filed in archives that will outlive the men who signed them. You hear the term extraterritoriality whispered by foreign merchants, like some new magic spell that turns your laws into suggestions and their ambitions into reality. Streets hum with uncertainty. Traders carry opium chests along the docks. The smell of the flower thick enough to coat your tongue, thick enough to coat history itself with a haze of submission. You try to remember that this is still China, that the rivers and mountains and silk are yours, but the ground has shifted beneath your feet, slowly, imperceptibly, and yet irrevocably. Every day, more treaties arrive, each one polite, formal, and fatal. They arrive like clockwork, a century-long roast delivered with impeccable timing and devastating efficiency. You watch cities slip from your empire as if someone were exchanging playing cards. Hong Kong, Kowloon, Shanghai, each one a little louder in the chorus of humiliation. Soldiers patrol ports under foreign flags. Customs officers answer to distant voices. You think of the dynasties before you, emperors who held power with pride and fire, and you feel the weight of centuries collapsing into a polite nod. History has become a theater of procedure, and the joke is on you. Children play in the streets, oblivious, their laughter ringing against walls that have heard the decree and the canon but not yet the moral. Old scholars mutter in courtyards, brushing ink over maps with trembling hands, recording the empire's shrinkage in volumes that future generations will read, with awe and sorrow. You overhear merchants complain in whispers, "We are still China," but someone else writes the ledger. It is true and not true at the same time, a paradox that tastes bitter and familiar. Foreign diplomats stroll through palaces, their boots silent over marble floors, observing art, architecture, and tradition, all while measuring profit, influence, and obedience. They are polite, generous even, but their politeness is a scalpel, slicing confidence into neat, invisible sections. You see the guards, swords at rest, glancing uneasily at the new banners flapping in the wind. Someone jokes, quietly, that China has just entered the century of being lectured by men who have never even mastered the Great Wall. Everyone laughs, but it is a hollow sound, a brittle mask over something much heavier. And yet life continues. Lanterns glow at night, tea simmers in kitchens, scholars debate philosophy under plum trees, oblivious or determined to endure. The empire remains, but it is a different empire, one now measured not by the breadth of its territory, but by the endurance of its pride. You watch the sun set over the river, its reflection fractured in ripples, and realize that this is the beginning. The century of humiliation has arrived quietly, politely, mercilessly. You are living it, and there is no getting up until the century ends. You wake up to the same sun rising over the yellow river, golden and innocent as if nothing has changed, and yet the empire around you is simmering with chaos that smells faintly of sweetness. The officials in Beijing shuffle papers and carry inkpots, as if the bureaucratic treadmill can outrun disaster. But you know better. Corruption leaks from the highest palaces down to the smallest village, running through the empire like an invisible river, slick and unstoppable. Taxes are collected with polite smiles, then disappear into pockets thicker than the Great Wall itself. Merchants bribe and counter-bribe. Armies are underfunded, and farmers whisper prayers into the wind while struggling to keep their rice paddies from becoming sand. Opium, however, makes everything louder. It floats over the docks like a fragrant fog, coating the air and softening the edges of human judgment. You walk past carts loaded with chests, the smell sweet, almost comforting, until you remember what that comfort costs. Traders pass quietly, eyes darting, lips pursed, aware that every puff, every sale, is feeding a machine that doesn't need to build anything, it only needs to corrupt. Smugglers laugh in alleys, counting silver pieces, watching as officials look the other way, and you realize that this isn't just a flower, it's a currency, more versatile than coins, and twice as dangerous. And then there are the rebels. Peasants, armed with sticks, desperation, and very little else, wander the countryside like shadows of protest. Their anger is old, ancient even, fed by starvation, imperial neglect, and a mountain of paper decrees that promise more than they deliver. Opium seeps into the towns and villages like a sneaky diplomat, dulling outrage, softening resolve, and turning fury into lethargy. You watch men who might otherwise storm gates, who might carve justice into stone, instead stumble past rice fields, hands shaking, mouths whispering prayers, or the names of gods they haven't felt in weeks. Famine does its slow work too. Rivers dry, floods rise, crops fail. You see mothers whisper lullabies over empty bowls, and children trading dreams for scraps of bread. The empire's machinery groans under the weight of its own inefficiency, and the officials discuss contingency plans with the same precision one might use to arrange flowers. The emperor issues edicts that sound impressive on paper, but in reality, they are just ink on parchment drifting down the yellow river. Meanwhile, opium travels in the opposite direction, fast, sweet, and unstoppable. The courts are no better. You hear the whispering of judges who have long ago forgotten the difference between law and convenience. Every decision, every decree, every punishment seems to carry the invisible scent of bribes, favors, and the subtle influence of smoke. It's a palace that operates like a clockwork toy, beautiful, precise, and completely detached from the suffering of the people outside. The contrast is dizzying. Farmers toil under the sun, rebels march through mud, officials sit in silk robes, and the poppy stands in the middle, laughing quietly, dripping its influence into every corner. And yet, you notice the quiet beauty of it all. Rivers still flow, mountains still rise, lanterns still glow at night. Families gather around dim fires, sharing stories, tea, and whispered secrets. People endure, persist, and survive despite corruption, famine, and the addictive allure of the opium dens. The empire is frayed, strained, cracking at the edges, yet stubbornly alive, like a massive dragon coughing smoke while trying to sleep on a bed of silk. Opium isn't the sole culprit, not by a long shot. It doesn't command armies or direct taxes. It doesn't flood rivers or set fire to granaries. Yet it magnifies everything, makes corruption louder, hunger sharper, rebellion more desperate, and greed smell like caramel syrup. It is profit distilled into smoke, a siren that hums through the empire's veins. And as you walk past another cart of chests bound for the docks, you understand that the flower itself is innocent. It is the empire that has forgotten to care. And sometimes, you wonder if anyone will remember which problem came first, or if opium simply became the loudest trumpet in a symphony of disaster. You hear whispers in the villages, murmurs of a man claiming visions, a brother of Jesus who promises salvation, order, and a new heaven on earth. You squint into the horizon and see banners rising, red as fire and blood, carried by people who have nothing left to lose. The Taiping. Rebellion doesn't start politely. It starts with fury, desperation, and a belief that the world itself has forgotten the common man. You walk past fields where farmers once bent under the sun, now abandoned, their hands empty, their faces etched with a new kind of dread. It spreads like a fever, touching towns and cities, consuming everything that stands between hope and chaos. Opium, of course, is never far away. Even amid revolts, the merchants and traders continue their business, disguising smoke as medicine, trade as convenience. You pass dens where men and women sit with glazed eyes, inhaling sweetness that dulls the horror outside the windows. The rebellion marches, fires crackle, and you realize that the poppy has become an uninvited companion in every disaster. You watch leaders chant scriptures and promises, their eyes burning with conviction, while just beyond the city walls, opium quietly lubricates the gears of both empire and insurgency, making soldiers sluggish and officials complacent. You witness the first battles, where armies clash with the awkward precision of men who believe in righteousness but forget strategy. Cannons roar, muskets spit fire, and the earth trembles beneath marching feet. You duck behind a wall and see children hiding under carts, watching their homes burn while parents argue about loyalty and survival. The red banners move relentlessly, sweeping through provinces, recruiting the desperate, the hungry, the ones who have nothing to lose except perhaps their lives. Every confrontation leaves the ground littered with bodies, a grotesque tapestry of the human cost. 20 million die, and the numbers feel abstract until you step on a torn shoe or catch the smell of someone's last meal still burning in a field. Even the imperial court, far away in Beijing, trembles. You hear that the emperor's decrees barely reach the provinces, filtered through layers of bureaucracy and apathy. Governors send letters, officials send excuses, and soldiers mutter prayers as they march toward flames and arrows. Meanwhile, the opium trade continues, a quiet river of profit that refuses to be disrupted by blood, ideology, or celestial visions. Smugglers smile as they count coins, entirely aware that the empire is tearing itself apart and yet still consuming the poison they peddle. You walk through a town where nothing looks the same. Temples are repurposed as barracks, rice paddies trampled, markets burned. Survivors whisper about the rebel leaders, about the visions, about the strange mix of religion and politics that fuels the slaughter. The poppy's scent lingers even here, a bizarre reminder that while men die for ideas, commerce never sleeps. Even in the most righteous revolt, someone finds a way to profit, to smoke, to forget for a moment that the world is falling apart. You realize that the Taiping Rebellion is not a story you hear in polite conversation. It is a cacophony of violence, faith, and any word, mismanagement, punctuated by the sweet haze of opium. Empires falter not just from swords, but from neglect, corruption, and the quiet seduction of easy pleasure. You notice the irony. An army claiming moral supremacy marches under banners of salvation, while the very substance that has corrupted the empire seeps into their own ranks. The righteous burn, the innocent suffer, and opium drifts through the chaos like smoke from a candle no one wants to extinguish. And so, you walk on, past charred villages and exhausted survivors, past armies that fight for heaven and emperors who fight for memory, and you understand that history does not need a single villain. The Taiping Rebellion is a mirror, reflecting everything China has failed to manage: faith, desperation, bureaucracy, and the quiet, insidious power of a poppy flower. The empire bleeds, the people burn, and somewhere in the haze, opium smiles. You watch the horizon as British ships cut through the fog like polished teeth. You remember the last time this happened, when cannon smoke hung over the rivers and cities alike, and you tell yourself it can't get worse. You are wrong. France is here now, adding its own flair of arrogance, the kind that comes with powdered wigs and cigars, and you feel the subtle panic coil in your chest. The Second Opium War isn't about principles, not really. It's about trade, pride, and that peculiar confidence that comes from knowing your navy has never lost a staring contest with a distant empire. You hear orders barked in 3 languages, none of them translating to mercy. The ports are alive with chaos. Merchants flee. Officials argue over protocol, and peasants watch their livelihoods dissolve in waves of smoke and water. The British aren't subtle. Their guns thunder like a chorus of angry gods, shaking buildings that have survived centuries of neglect. You duck behind a crumbling wall and see a French officer waving a saber, looking less like military genius and more like someone who forgot to read the instructions. The river itself seems to quiver at the noise, sending boats careening into one another in a ballet of unintended destruction. Opium shipments are once again the silent catalyst. You notice chests washed overboard, spilling their syrupy contents into the river where fish float sluggishly, perhaps addicted already. The empire is struggling to contain both its commerce and its conscience, which is like trying to patch a leaking dam with rice paper. Every cannonball fired is a punctuation mark in a sentence that nobody wanted to read aloud. China is cracking, and it smells faintly of tea and smoke. You walk through the city and notice how quickly everything has become negotiable. Forts, warehouses, entire streets. A British officer points at a market and says something about tariffs and civilized rights, while locals stare in disbelief, wondering when the civilized part became optional. French troops parade in, tossing coins and insults, offering polite destruction that somehow feels worse than the British variety. You wonder who taught these people etiquette in war, and whether the teacher was laughing as the students massacred the landscape. Meanwhile, imperial officials scramble, papers flying like autumn leaves in a storm. Orders contradict one another. Confusion reigns, and every palace corridor becomes a theater of whispered panic. You see the emperor in his study, attempting to maintain dignity while the walls shake. He writes letters that will never be read, stamps decrees that will never be enforced, and paces corridors like a man who knows the map of his empire is now a hand-drawn doodle in someone else's notebook. The foreign powers press on relentlessly. You watch forts crumble, walls splinter, and soldiers retreat in disorganized swarms, their pride drowning faster than their supplies. Smoke and ash mingle with opium-laced fog, and you realize that no strategy can compete with the combination of foreign technology, imperial mismanagement, and sheer momentum of arrogance. Even the riverbank seems to sag under the weight of history, remembering the First War and groaning under the Second. You glimpse civilians trapped between advancing troops, caught in a surreal performance of diplomacy and devastation. Streets fill with confusion as flags from 3 nations flutter in a wind thick with gunpowder. Opium dens that once hummed quietly with the rhythm of commerce now smell like ash, a bitter reminder that the substance that started this mess continues to dictate its end. By the time the smoke clears, you understand that nothing has changed except the scale of humiliation. Hong Kong is again wrested from the empire. Ports are conceded as if negotiating over snacks, and treaties are signed with ink that will stain the pride of generations. You look at the horizon, at the ships waiting like smug sharks, and wonder if history has a sense of humor. The Second Opium War ends not with clarity, but with echoes of cannon fire, opium smoke curling through the air, and the quiet, pervasive truth. The empire is a puzzle solved by everyone else except the Chinese themselves. And you, standing amidst the debris, inhale deeply, tasting both ash and the faint sweetness of opium still lingering in the air. Smoke curls into the sky like a lazy serpent, painting the horizon with streaks of fire and ash. You stand on the edge of the lake, eyes wide, as the grandeur of the summer palace folds into itself, a paper dragon set ablaze by men who wear red coats and blue uniforms and seem incapable of distinguishing beauty from a target. Every pavilion, every carved beam, every delicate painting screams in color before it surrenders to smoke. You hear the crackle and pop of roofs collapsing, the snap of timbers breaking, and it feels like the heartbeat of the empire itself is being stomped out in slow, deliberate rhythm. The soldiers move with a kind of polite efficiency that makes you want to vomit in admiration and horror simultaneously. They march through gardens that once smelled of jasmine and lotus, leaving only footprints and embers behind. One officer stops to glance at a porcelain vase, tilts his head like a bored art critic, and then tosses it into a fire pit with a shrug. The shards explode with a sound that could be mistaken for thunder if you weren't too busy crying silently. You wonder if he understands that this is centuries of culture being erased in the span of an afternoon, or if he just thinks it's an oddly satisfying pyrotechnic display. From the lake, the reflections shimmer and twist, doubling the destruction in the water as if even nature itself cannot resist mimicking the chaos. The opulent bridges that once arched like swans over calm waters buckle and fall. Sculptures crumble into ash. Scrolls that contained poems and maps, instructions for court etiquette, and treatises on philosophy curl and blacken as though the paper itself is gasping. And yet, the soldiers march on, unbothered by the fact that they are not just conquering a place, but the memory of it. You wander through the palace grounds, careful to avoid burning beams that threaten to snap under the weight of gravity and history. Every step is punctuated by the scent of scorched wood, melted lacquer, and faint opium wafting from hidden corners, reminders of indulgence long gone. You stumble over fragments of porcelain and jade, shards that gleam even in ruin, mocking you with their beauty and resilience. It is impossible not to feel small, a single soul witnessing the deliberate dismantling of centuries of thought, art, and politics. Meanwhile, foreign officers sip tea and smoke cigars, discussing tactics and supplies as though they are hosting a garden party. Military necessity, they call it, their words floating in the air like smoke rings. You think of every emperor, every court official, every artist who once walked these corridors, and imagine them spinning in their graves, horrified yet powerless. Their careful gardens are ash, their delicate architecture is splinters. Their histories are reduced to glowing embers drifting over the lake. Somewhere in the chaos, a lone soldier carries a gilded throne through a narrow corridor. He trips, and the throne lands with a shattering crash, the sound echoing like an insult through the halls. You feel the absurdity of it all. Entire dynasties of refinement and power being reduced to noise and smoke, handled like props in a play they never auditioned for. Even the wind seems complicit, fanning the flames and scattering the remnants like confetti at a festival meant to celebrate destruction. You watch the palace burn into a memory, a ghostly outline against the red sky. Flames dance along the roofs like living things, consuming the intricate carvings and ornate murals that survived centuries of emperors, floods, and negligence, only to die by foreign hands. And you realize that this isn't just property being destroyed. This is a statement, a punctuated sentence in the history of humiliation, a visual echo of powerlessness and foreign dominance that will haunt the empire for generations. By the time the last flames lick the sky and the smoke begins to thin, all that remains is ruin. Charred beams jut out like jagged teeth. Ash coats the ground in a thick, oppressive blanket. The lake shivers with reflection, holding the destruction like a mirror to your disbelief. And somewhere deep in your chest, a quiet, bitter certainty settles. This is more than a palace burning. This is the empire itself, flickering and fragile, and for the first time, it feels dangerously close to falling into the hands of those who have no understanding, only appetite. History, you realize, has never smelled quite like smoke, ash, and opium before. You step into the forbidden city, and the first thing that hits you isn't the grandeur, it's the smell. Incense, sweat, silk, and the faint trace of opium hang in the air like a reminder that nothing here is simple. The halls stretch endlessly, but every corridor is dominated by a single presence, Empress Dowager Cixi. She arrives as if the palace itself has exhaled her, a swirl of peacock feathers, jeweled hairpins, and barely restrained menace. You notice immediately that the room bends to her will, that courtiers scurry like startled birds, and even the eunuchs seem to hold their breath, hoping not to attract her ire. She smiles, but it isn't a friendly smile. It's a smile that promises delight, cruelty, and scandal all at once. You try to keep your eyes on the intricate embroidery of her robes, because looking at her face directly might result in humiliation, or worse, a public execution. Every movement she makes is calculated, every gesture a performance. You start to suspect she thinks the empire is just an elaborate stage set for her to rehearse power, and the rest of the court are nothing but extras she can replace at will. Tsichi talks, and when she talks, you feel words ricochet like arrows off the walls. The Empress has a voice that commands attention, but also a sense of humor so dark it makes you wince. She quips about corruption as if it were a bedtime story, about foreign intrusions as if they were minor inconveniences, and about her own indulgences with a wink that is somehow both charming and terrifying. You realize quickly that she doesn't just tolerate chaos, she choreographs it, wrapping the entire court in a glittering, terrifying dance where no one quite knows the steps. You witness her issuing orders with a hand that flicks like a whip, sending armies, officials, and taxes in directions that make little sense, but somehow the empire survives anyway. It's a balancing act, watching her manage intrigue, rebellion, and foreign demands with the casual elegance of someone stirring tea. You wonder if she ever sleeps, or if the empire is her constant entertainment, a pet project that she can tweak, torment, and show off at will. Then she laughs, a sharp musical sound that fills the hall and echoes against the marble floors. You notice the courtiers smiling too, though nervously, as if laughter itself were contagious and dangerous. Cixi has mastered an art you never knew existed, turning fear into amusement, obedience into theater. You can't decide if you're witnessing genius or madness, and maybe it's both. The lines blur, and the palace seems suspended in a state of perpetual suspense, as if any wrong word could topple the entire performance. You see her interact with diplomats and generals, bending them to her will, with nothing more than a raised eyebrow or a flick of her fan. Foreigners mistake politeness for weakness, and you bite back laughter at the absurdity. They don't know that she views them the way one might regard ants on a marble floor, curious, easily squashed, but ultimately entertaining. Every treaty signed, every bribe extracted, every whispered threat is a move in her ongoing game, a game you suddenly realize might have no rules outside her own cunning. And yet, behind the peacock feathers, the jewels, and the perfectly poised smile, you catch glimpses of a woman who is both brilliant and exhausted, trapped in a role she has perfected at the expense of personal freedom. You sense that she carries the weight of an empire, a crumbling palace, and centuries of expectation in every step, yet she refuses to let it show. By the time you leave the hall, you are dizzy from the whirlwind of power, beauty, and barely contained chaos that is Empress Dowager Cixi. You understand that she doesn't just rule the empire, she performs it, and for better or worse, every eye in the Forbidden City is caught in the orbit of her dazzling, dangerous gravity. She watches you go with a tilt of her head, a sly grin, and you swear you see the empire itself shimmer, like it's caught between collapse and perfection, all under the guidance of a woman in a peacock robe. You wander the streets of Beijing, and the first thing you notice is the arguing. It's everywhere. Courtiers in silk robes shout over the clatter of rickshaws. Officials with carefully waxed mustaches scribble furiously on scrolls. Reformers clutch treatises in one hand and dreams in the other, insisting that the empire can be saved with factories, telegraphs, and new schools. They speak with passion, waving their hands like conductors of a symphony only they can hear. You can almost feel the air crackle with the potential of progress, and the faint smell of someone's dinner burning in the courtyard. Across the way, the realists shake their heads. They are dressed in equally fine robes, but with a stubborn crease in their foreheads, that suggests they've been disappointed too many times. They point at maps, budgets, and letters from foreign powers with the grim determination of people who understand. That reform isn't magic. It's slow, painful, and mostly ignored by the emperor. They argue that the real problem isn't schools or factories. It's opium, corruption, and a government running on hope and bureaucracy. You nod along to their logic, but mostly just because you don't want to get hit with a rolled-up scroll. Then there are the people who just want a nap. They are everywhere, sprawled on benches, leaning against temple walls, or hiding in alleyways. They whisper about reforms, shake their heads at realists, and then promptly fall asleep mid-sentence. You watch one man snore through a particularly heated debate about taxation and wonder if he's more realistic than anyone else. The city hums around him, carrying on with wars, treaties, and smuggling rings, while he dreams peacefully of a world where opium doesn't exist and tea is free. The reformers try to convince you that new schools will fix everything. They promise modern armies, industrialization, and an prize, end to foreign humiliation, if only you listen, learn, and implement their ideas immediately. You follow their speeches with a mixture of amusement and disbelief, marveling at their energy while realizing that half of them probably haven't left a single village in their lives. They scribble charts that look like dragon scribbles and cite treaties that nobody remembers signing. Meanwhile, the realists remind you that energy and good intentions are not substitutes for actual enforcement. They point to the coastlines where British ships still cruise with smug smiles, and to the ever-growing number of addicts in the cities, and to an emperor who can't choose between ignoring the problem and delegating it to a committee. They don't yell, they don't laugh. They just sigh in a way that feels like it could collapse roofs if prolonged. And still, the nappers nap. They are zen in a chaotic city, oblivious to reform pamphlets and census reports. You see one roll onto the side of a rickshaw cart as it passes, and he barely flinches. Another stretches across a merchant's display of silk and lies there with the serenity of someone who has decided that nothing is worth waking up for. They are the ghosts of every ignored solution, the silent commentary on an empire that debates endlessly while the rot spreads quietly beneath. You watch the cycle repeat itself day after day. Reformers with their charts, realists with their grim wisdom, and nappers with their total indifference. None of them seem willing to tackle the opium problem directly. It sits there like an elephant in a tea house, quietly making everything worse while people squabble around it. You feel caught in the middle, part amused, part frustrated, entirely certain that nothing about the empire's situation is going to change until someone finally decides that staring at the problem isn't enough. And yet, life carries on. Arguments continue, nappers continue to nap, and opium continues to flow. You realize that watching all this is exhausting, but secretly satisfying, like observing a theater where the actors are too stubborn, too scared, or too lazy to follow the script. The empire doesn't need perfection, it just needs someone awake enough to act. You step back, take a breath, and realize you're not sure anyone in the room actually wants to be that person. The opium problem waits, and it's not going anywhere. You walk through the teeming streets of Shanghai, and you can feel it. Something is stirring. Not the usual bustle of merchants hawking silk or the clatter of rickshaws over cobblestone, but a different energy. It's a feverish whisper that grows louder as you pass lacquered doors plastered with pamphlets, as you sidestep puddles that smell faintly of tea and human despair. The revolutionaries are awake now, and they have ideas that could burn the empire down if anyone actually followed through. They speak in low voices about the glory of China, about pride, about reclaiming a nation humiliated for decades, but you notice one consistent accessory clutched in their hands. A pipe, long and curling like a dragon's tail. Even the fiercest patriot needs a little something to steady the nerves. You wander closer and see them hunched over tables in dimly lit tea houses, ink-stained fingers, tapping aggressively on newspapers that scream about foreign incursions and corrupt mandarins. They argue over strategies for protests, armed uprisings, and political reforms. But between each fiery sentence, there's a pause to inhale the opium smoke curling lazily toward the ceiling. It's almost artistic, the way they balance idealism and addiction, like tightrope walkers swaying in time to a wind that nobody else notices. You marvel at the irony. The very substance that once threatened to strangle the empire now provides a quiet companion to those who want to save it. Outside, young men and women march silently in the alleyways, banners folded and tucked under arms, eyes bright with purpose and smoke. You follow one revolutionary as he pauses to light his pipe, and in that brief curl of smoke, you see a kind of determination you can't quite name. They're not just fighting opium, they're fighting everything that allowed opium to take hold. Complacency, corruption, foreign arrogance, and centuries of neglect. And yet, the opium remains, like a loyal friend they can't fully abandon. It's almost comforting, in a twisted way, to see revolutionaries taking a puff before charging into the uncertainty of tomorrow. You duck into a backstreet tea house and find an entire table of radicals debating the future while passing the pipe around like an honorary membership badge. The words fly fast and furious. Nationalism, modernization, independence. And through it all, the smoke curls, a silent witness to the messy brilliance of their planning. You notice that each inhale seems to fuel their arguments, sharpening their rhetoric, while softening the edge of their anxiety. You wonder if the empire has ever been saved by anything so quietly subversive. Outside, the streets carry the faint scent of incense and burning coal, but mixed in is the unmistakable tang of opium, proof that history is rarely neat. Every revolution needs momentum, and every revolutionary needs a moment to steady their hands, to clear their head, to make the impossible feel a little less impossible. You watch them pass notes, exchange secret signals, and all the while, the pipes glow with a soft amber light that makes the whole scene feel cinematic, absurd, and tragic all at once. You step back into the chaos and realize that the rise of Chinese nationalism is not a clean story of heroism. It's messy, complicated, and a little smoky. Ideals mix with habit, courage mixes with vice, and the line between salvation and surrender blurs with every puff. You can't help but admire the sheer audacity of it, fighting centuries of humiliation while simultaneously indulging in the substance that caused part of it. It's audacious, it's reckless, and somehow it feels alive. And as the night stretches on, with banners flapping in the wind and the aroma of opium curling around lamplight, you recognize one undeniable truth. Even the most righteous of rebels need something to take the edge off. You inhale, you exhale. The revolution is just beginning. You stand in the village square, and the air is thick with incense, sweat, and the bristling sense of something about to snap. Around you, men and women paint their faces with mysterious symbols and shout the names of spirits they believe will make them invincible. You watch as a group of teenagers swing sticks with the solemnity of generals, convinced that their chants will protect them from bullets, cannons, and reality itself. It's mesmerizing, a kind of chaos that feels both ancient and terribly modern. You can't help but notice the gleam of hope in their eyes, a hope that defies common sense and physics. You follow them into the alleys of Tianjin, where makeshift banners flap in the wind, declaring war on foreigners, missionaries, and anyone who reminds them of the humiliation the empire has endured. They move with a conviction that borders on delusion, each ritualistic step a promise that the spirits will intervene. You peek over shoulders as the leaders instruct their comrades in complex formations, waving swords and fists while chanting spells that seem to vibrate against the walls. It's a performance of courage, but also one of desperation. The foreign troops have arrived, and the distant rumble of artillery grows louder with each passing moment. The villagers pause, chest heaving, as if their chance alone could alter the trajectory of iron and gunpowder. You notice an old man standing in the crowd, shaking a bell that he swears will protect the town. His fingers tremble, his eyes dart nervously, but his voice is unwavering. You realize that faith in magic has replaced faith in strategy, that rituals have substituted for leadership, and that bravery alone will not hold a line against modern weaponry. In the heart of the town, a clash erupts. You feel the jolt of panic in the air as wooden swords meet rifles, as the invisible becomes brutally visible. Shouts echo off the stone walls, and smoke rises from small fires where chaos has taken root. You see a group of villagers charge, chanting, and then falter as bullets tear through the illusion of invincibility. The sound is thunderous, and for a brief moment, time seems to slow. You can almost hear the whispers of history mocking the faith that led them here. Yet despite the carnage, the belief does not waver entirely. Men and women continue to dance through the chaos, slashing at shadows, invoking spirits, and refusing to acknowledge the simple truth. Bullets are faster than prayers. You notice a child clutching a toy sword, stepping into a puddle of mud and blood, convinced she can protect her home. Her determination is both heartbreaking and extraordinary, a testament to human stubbornness in the face of certainty. You step back, taking it all in. The Boxer Rebellion is a spectacle of courage and futility wrapped into one, a collision of the mystical and the mechanical. You feel the weight of history pressing down, the inevitability of foreign forces and modern arms reshaping a world that still clings to old ways. And yet, through the smoke and chaos, the chants continue, stubborn and beautiful, a refusal to surrender to logic, to defeat, or to despair. You realize, as the dust settles and the cries echo into the evening, that belief in magic cannot stop bullets, but it can make people move as though they might. You stand in the shadow of the foreign legation in Beijing, the air thick with smoke, fear, and the faintly sweet scent of opium. Outside the walls, mobs surge like rivers gone rogue, chanting, shouting, and occasionally throwing rocks that would barely dent a teacup, let alone the stone walls of an embassy. You can't help but notice the strange calm behind those walls, the way diplomats lounge in chairs, sipping tea as if the world's chaos were a mere inconvenience rather than a siege. Inside, the rooms are lined with velvet, polished wood, and the kind of carpets that could swallow your feet whole. The windows are barred and reinforced, and the gates are locked with mechanisms that seem designed more for a fortress than a simple office. The occupants move with a peculiar combination of panic and privilege, whispering urgently about treaties, indemnities, and trade concessions while taking careful puffs from ornate opium pipes. You watch them as they pass little china cups of liquid smoke back and forth, and you wonder how anyone can negotiate the fate of an empire with a half-conscious haze clouding every decision. From the courtyard, you hear the roar of the crowd, a living wall of anger pressing against diplomacy and sense alike. Stones clatter against iron gates, and you see the occasional torch flare, illuminating the panic on the faces pressed against the outer walls. And yet inside, the diplomats barely flinch. They are wrapped in layers of cotton and silk, sipping their opium like a comforting elixir, occasionally glancing at reports that read like an apocalypse in slow motion. They discuss what cities must be ceded, what taxes can be collected, and how best to protect their property, while subtly ignoring the fact that half of the empire is burning outside their gates. You walk past a young clerk, whose hands are trembling as he tallies the spoils of trade. He whispers about the amounts of opium stored below, and you realize that the real priority isn't survival or honor, but the preservation of a drug that has fueled not only their empire but the one across the seas. There's a strange hierarchy in these moments. The outside world, full of fury and justice, and the inside world, full of smoke and contracts, where opium is treated as more sacred than life itself. From your vantage point, it almost seems like theater. The walls hold up under the assault. The diplomats shuffle from room to room, and the opium continues to burn gently, curling into the air like an indifferent spirit. You hear shouts demanding the surrender of embassies, the execution of foreign envoys, the expulsion of intruders, and yet no one dares touch the smoke-stained rooms where trade secrets and smoke coexist in a bizarre harmony. You wonder if anyone outside the gates notices that the real siege is not just of buildings, but of ethics, of morality, and of the ability to look at a crisis without a pipe in hand. Night falls, and the torches dim. You see the last of the rioters retreating into the alleys, exhausted and frustrated, while the diplomats lean back, half asleep, half smiling, counting losses and profits alike. The opium burns on. You realize something unsettling. The world may be on fire, empires may be bleeding, and people may be dying just outside these walls, but inside, the pipes glow, the smoke curls, and priorities remain perfectly preserved. You watch as officials scurry through the halls of the Forbidden City, papers stacked so high they threaten to topple like unbuilt skyscrapers. Someone whispers about modernization, and you tilt your head, wondering if the word has ever been spoken out loud here before. They talk of railways, telegraphs, and arsenals, as if saying the words could make steel appear overnight. You follow their frantic pacing, sensing both desperation and stubborn pride, like a dog insisting on sitting in a burning room because it's always sat there before. Outside, cities smolder, peasants starve, and the navy what little remains is rusting in ports, dreams of battleships long abandoned to time and termites. You see courtiers debating whether to allow Western advisors, then promptly dismissing the idea, because, well, tradition. Traditions are sticky. They have a way of clinging to robes and scrolls, and the belief that a single decree can fix decades of neglect. Reform here is not a plan. It's a performance, a gesture with ribbons and red seals, meant to make the world look like something is being done, while nothing actually changes. You wander past a factory being modernized, a building that smells of sawdust, ambition, and faint despair. There are machines, sure, but the operators seem more confused than the machines themselves. A bell rings somewhere, announcing efficiency, or maybe just lunch. No one can tell the difference. You realize that modernization in the Qing is like trying to teach a cat to fetch. Theoretically possible, but mostly a spectacle that ends in chaos and hissing. A reformer approaches, spectacles sliding down his nose, carrying proposals that could, if anyone read them, reshape the military, the education system, even trade. You watch as the ministers smile politely, nod, and immediately place the papers in a drawer marked later, maybe, or never. There is a rhythm here, a dance between urgency and inaction, each step perfectly choreographed to ensure the status quo remains untouched. You wonder if anyone notices that time is bleeding out of the empire faster than ink spills onto the calligraphy scrolls they're so proud of. Meanwhile, the people outside go about their desperate business, unaware that their rulers are fumbling with reforms, as if testing new robes in a storm. Taxes rise, markets falter, and still, the grand halls of governance echo with speeches about innovation and progress. You can't help but notice that each new initiative has a certain theatrical quality, like a magician waving a wand over a half-collapsed bridge and promising that tomorrow it will carry elephants. It won't. Not without more than words. You follow a young bureaucrat tasked with implementing a telegraph system, and he runs into a wall of red tape so high you could mistake it for a fortress. Cables are laid, then cut, then relayed, with officials insisting on inspecting each knot as if its moral weight could change the outcome of a war. You watch him sigh, realizing that the empire's version of reform is as much about paperwork and pride as it is about actual change. And yet, amid the chaos, there is a strange kind of energy, a pulse of hope buried beneath exhaustion, smoke, and centuries of stubborn tradition. You see it in the eyes of young students, in the hands of apprentices learning to wield machines, in the half-finished factories that hint at what could be. The empire tries a makeover, but fire is already licking the edges of the palace. Smoke curls from distant villages, and you can't help thinking that no silk robe, no ornate decree, no parade of reforms will stop the walls from cracking if the foundations have been rotting for generations. Still, they try. And you watch. You stand in the streets, feeling the pulse of a city that once bowed to the dragon throne, now thrumming with chaos. Paper banners flap in the wind, carrying slogans that promise revolution, reform, or at least a decent meal. People shout, jostle, and wave fists at invisible enemies, while merchants peddle everything from dumplings to dynamite. 3 feet from where you stand, a man offers opium with a grin that says, "Business as usual, just with more fireworks." You blink. It's somehow fitting. The empire crumbles, and yet some things never change. Buildings sway with uncertainty, some because they were poorly constructed, others because everyone is shaking them out of frustration. You see officials fleeing in silk robes that were once symbols of divine authority. Now they catch on lampposts, trip over piles of discarded scrolls, or argue about which exit offers the most dignity. You watch as one particularly dignified minister attempts a bow in the middle of a riot and ends up face first, in a mud puddle. He looks up, dignity splattered but intact in spirit. Crowds surge forward, a river of anger, hope, confusion, and exhaustion. You try to track who is chanting for what, but it's a blur. Rebels demanding equality, merchants demanding payment, students demanding recognition, and everyone demanding that the opium seller leave them alone. You dodge a thrown shoe, step over a toppled cart, and realize that the collapse of an empire is a full-contact sport, and you have no protective gear. A young soldier passes, his uniform patched with more hope than fabric. He carries a rifle but no idea who to aim it at. You see him hesitate, glance at the chaos, and lower his weapon because the enemy isn't obvious, or maybe because he doesn't know why he's fighting at all. Around you, dragons carved into palace gates twist as if laughing, fire licking their tails, mocking centuries of rule that couldn't survive a few hours of disorder. Someone sets off a firecracker, the sound exploding like history in your ears. The crowd leaps back, laughs, cries, and then continues marching, each step a punctuation mark on a story that's been centuries in the making. You notice that people are helping each other, shoving carts together, carrying the injured, sharing rice and water. Amid the collapse, there is life, messy and stubborn. You drift past a square where speeches echo off stone walls. Revolutionaries shout promises of a new era, their voices hoarse but hopeful. Courtiers mutter curses at invisible spirits, at fate, at each other. Somewhere in the mix, a poet recites lines about fallen emperors, smoke, and the opium haze that dulled an entire dynasty. The words float into the evening air, mingling with the scent of wet earth, burnt wood, and the faintly sweet tang of opium. And then, the throne itself, once a golden seat of power, is empty. Curtains hang like tired flags. Dust motes dance in shafts of light that had never been allowed to touch the polished floors before. The dragon has fallen, and you walk past the hollow palace, feeling the weight of centuries lift just enough to reveal the chaos beneath. The streets are alive, ungoverned, unpredictable, and in that moment, you understand something. Empires collapse, but people do not. They stumble forward, make deals, sell opium, shout, laugh, cry, and rebuild in ways history can never predict. You step over another toppled cart and take a deep breath. The Qing are gone, but the city is still breathing, and somehow that is both terrifying and exhilarating. The streets are quieter now, but only because silence has been replaced by a new kind of chaos. You walk past makeshift checkpoints where men in mismatched uniforms wave rifles and demand bribes with the same enthusiasm you once reserved for tax collectors. The empire is gone, but authority is fractured, scattered like leaves in a storm, and somehow everyone still expects you to pay attention. You shrug and keep moving, stepping over broken carts, abandoned rice bags, and the occasional opium pipe someone left behind like a calling card. Every town you pass seems to have its own king, or warlord, or self-proclaimed general. Some ride horses that look faster than their strategic thinking, waving sabers at anyone who dares to look bored. Others sit on crates, counting coins, smoking opium, and delegating the hard decisions to whoever is unlucky enough to stumble past. You start to notice a pattern. Wherever there is power, there is opium. Wherever there is opium, there is shouting, shooting, or both. A convoy of soldiers rides past, and they argue over which village belongs to whom. You try to follow their logic but quickly give up. Maps are useless. Borders are drawn in mud and blood, constantly redrawn by whoever got angry first. You pause to watch a young boy selling tea to the soldiers, trying to look invisible, hoping they won't notice the extra handful of opium tucked under the tray. Business thrives even as the state crumbles. You wander into a market where the air smells of smoke, fried noodles, and incense meant to bless the dead. Warlords have set up stalls alongside vendors, shouting over each other about loyalty, taxes, and which village will pay first. You realize that order now means surviving the loudest, and justice is whoever has the biggest gun. You duck as someone hurls a rock over your shoulder, aimed at a man who forgot to bow to the wrong flag. In the evenings, cities fill with lanterns, not for beauty, but to illuminate deals struck in shadow. Opium dens line narrow alleys, the smoke curling like a lazy river, mixing with the scent of sweat, cooking, and desperation. You watch men lean back, eyes half closed, laughing at stories that are probably lies, plotting futures that will never come. Life has adapted to the collapse. Survival is a negotiation, and opium is the lubricant. Every so often, you catch a glimpse of someone who looks like they've remembered the old empire, a former official hiding in plain sight. They nod politely as you pass, their expression a mix of sorrow and resignation. They know what was lost, and you do too. Unity is a memory, discipline is a joke, and the Dragon Throne is now just a story whispered to children who will never see it. And yet, even in this fractured land, life continues. Farmers till fields as bullets zip overhead. Merchants haggle for coins, and opium flows like water, smoothing the rough edges of a society that refuses to stop moving. You see it everywhere. Chaos paired with resilience, violence paired with ingenuity. The old empire may have vanished, but people, stubborn as weeds, persist. You pass a group of soldiers arguing over a village's allegiance, and a man in the corner selling opium with a grin that says, "Welcome to progress." You take a deep breath and move on, because there is no plan, no authority, only survival, and the faintly sweet smell of a drug that keeps the pieces from falling completely apart. The dragon may be broken, but its fire still flickers in unexpected corners, and somehow you can't stop watching. You watch the countryside wake up under a gray sky, the same one that's seen famine, warlords, and emperors come and go without much notice. Rice paddies glisten with water, reflecting a world that is supposed to be orderly, but isn't. Villagers move with a rhythm that is equal parts work and caution, because everyone knows power is now a rumor, and chaos is very, very real. You walk past someone carrying a heavy basket of grain, and he offers a nod, as if greeting an old friend who might also be the messenger of trouble. In towns, the air is thick with smoke from cooking fires, kerosene lamps, and the faintly sweet scent of opium. It's everywhere. You see it in alleyways, in tea houses, and in the hands of soldiers who should be guarding villages but are too busy guarding themselves. People have grown clever with survival. You watch a man hand a coin to a vendor who slides a small pouch across the table with the casual precision of a card dealer. And you realize opium is no longer an indulgence. It's part of the economy, part of daily life. You hear rumors of a young man moving through the provinces, a student turned revolutionary with more ambition than age. Mao. He talks of equality and liberation, of modernity and revolution, but you notice he's not immune to the old temptations. Opium is still the quiet shadow at the edges of every plan, every meeting, every whispered strategy. Some say he smokes it to think. Others say he smokes it because everyone else is. You can't be sure, but the smell follows him like a loyal dog. Mao's early comrades are a mix of idealists, opportunists, and people who just want a place to sleep without getting shot. They read books, memorize slogans, and plot over cups of tea that sometimes taste faintly of opium residue. You sit in on a meeting, and it's part serious, part theater. Strategies are drawn on scraps of paper, while arguments swirl around the room. And somewhere in the corner, someone coughs quietly, eyes glazed, and you understand that even revolution has its vices. As the political landscape shifts, you watch families hide what they can, trade what they must, and bend without breaking. Opium dens continue to operate like unspoken banks, keeping the economy lubricated with smoke and sugar. Soldiers and revolutionaries alike navigate the fine line between discipline and indulgence, and you learn quickly that everyone has a secret, sometimes multiple. It's not hypocrisy, it's survival. You follow Mao along narrow paths through the hills and villages, hearing him speak of peasants' rights, collective work, and a future free of foreign interference. You nod, but the smell lingers, reminding you that the past isn't gone. Addiction is a persistent guest, and while empires may have fallen, habits do not die quietly. Villagers smile politely, curious about the new leader who promises change, unaware that the very opium they smoke might follow them into the revolution. You notice the tension, the contradictions, and the small ironies. A movement built on discipline struggles with the legacies of indulgence. People who demand sacrifice still seek comfort. And amidst all the posters, speeches, and clandestine gatherings, you realize the opium problem isn't just a thing of the past. It's part of the soil, the culture, the very air you breathe as the revolution begins to stir. And yet, despite the smoke, the chaos, and the contradictions, you can't help but watch with a strange hope. Mao's ideas have fire, his ambition has weight, and the world is shifting, whether the village potheads like it or not. Opium may be a shadow, but even shadows retreat when the light is strong enough. You inhale the crisp air, taste the faint sweetness on the breeze, and step forward, realizing that the revolution, like addiction, is complicated, messy, and impossible to ignore. You walk the streets of a city that smells faintly of smoke, soot, and revolutionary slogans freshly painted on walls. Banners flap in the wind, declaring equality, unity, and the triumph of the proletariat. The streets are crowded with people who have lived through famine, warlords, foreign invasions, and decades of habit. You can see it in their eyes, cautious hope mixed with the unshakable memory of opium dens tucked into every alley. The new regime doesn't want to see those dens anymore. Not because of morality, but because opium is fundamentally unproletarian. You watch as officials sweep through neighborhoods with the efficiency of a storm, shutting down shops, confiscating pipes, and bulldozing what they can't carry. The air is tense, a mixture of fear and curiosity, and the faint sweetness of opium smoke seems to linger stubbornly, like it knows it has survived worse. Children peek from behind doors, while parents argue quietly, bargaining for leniency, or simply pretending not to notice the red banners that promise a new, clean life. Factories hum and machines clatter as the government pushes modernization, demanding labor from a population that is half exhausted, half hopeful. Everyone is supposed to work, produce, and embrace the new society, while simultaneously unlearning a habit that has been woven into the cultural fabric for over a century. You pass a line of former smokers queuing for state-sponsored rehabilitation. They look bewildered, twitching slightly, unsure how to process a world that wants them sober, productive, and politically correct all at once. You find yourself in a makeshift clinic where former addicts are taught that opium isn't a personal indulgence but a political problem. The nurses explain withdrawal with a mixture of scientific precision and moral urgency. Patients fidget and sneeze, mutter under their breath, and sometimes look straight at the ceiling, as if seeking advice from ancestors who probably never had to deal with cigarettes, let alone opium. The atmosphere is earnest, determined, and faintly comedic in its seriousness, like watching monks try to teach ballet. Everywhere you go, you see the contradictions. Peasants are encouraged to join collectives, while former opium smokers stumble through detox schedules. Soldiers patrol streets once dominated by dens, and the smell of propaganda is almost as strong as the lingering smoke of opium. Yet, the people adapt. They find new habits: tea instead of tobacco, work instead of smoke, slogans instead of sweet, narcotic comfort. You notice a man pouring sugar into his cup with the same ritualistic care he once used to pack a pipe. Even Mao's early disciples, who once may have indulged secretly, now march in lockstep with the campaign, carrying red books and stern faces. You see them pass former dens, now converted into schools or warehouses, and you catch a whiff of something bittersweet: nostalgia, survival, and the absurdity of trying to clean a century-long addiction with ideology. Still, not everyone is fully convinced. In back alleys, hidden from the patrols and the banners, you glimpse the occasional flash of familiarity: a pipe, a pouch, a nod between old friends who remember a different rhythm to life. The regime may have declared opium unproletarian, but human habit is stubborn, resilient, and sometimes quietly defiant. You walk home past factories, clinics, and former dens, realizing that the empire is cleaner, if not entirely free. The streets smell fresher, the slogans are louder, and the people move faster. But shadows of the past linger in the corners. You understand that cleaning an empire is never simple, especially when the habits it inherited are as seductive as they are persistent. And yet, there is progress, or something like it. You inhale the air, taste the faint tang of industry and fresh paint, and take a step forward, knowing that even a partial victory against centuries of addiction is worth noticing. The old empire is gone, the new one demands discipline, and life moves on with cautious optimism. But in the quiet corners, if you listen closely, the faint ghost of smoke still curls through the alleys. You walk through the empty streets where the empire once whispered its wealth and power. The opium dens are shuttered, their wooden doors warped and splintered, the delicate calligraphy above them peeling like old skin. You notice the temples too, their roofs sagging, paint faded to soft pastels, incense burners cold and dusty. There is no smoke curling in the air, no scent of sweet escape, only the faint tang of history hanging stubbornly, like a ghost refusing to leave. As you step over cracked tiles, you realize that absence can be heavier than presence. The dens were gone, yes, but their legacy lingers, etched into the streets, the architecture, the silence. You pass a courtyard where once men lounged in clouded bliss, counting silver while the empire quietly lost itself one puff at a time. Now, pigeons peck at the ground where coins once clinked, indifferent to centuries of human obsession and failure. You pause at a temple doorway, noticing the faint smudges on the stone where worshippers once pressed hands, seeking blessings and forgetting their burdens. Opium and faith had coexisted here, a delicate, dangerous equilibrium, and now neither remains. The air feels thinner, almost clinical, stripped of the haze that once softened the sharp edges of poverty, corruption, and foreign exploitation. You move through an alley lined with the remnants of paper lanterns, their once vibrant red muted to something closer to ash. A faded sign hangs crooked, advertising something you cannot read anymore. The characters blurred, like memory itself. The silence presses against your ears, broken only by the distant clatter of construction or the occasional shout of a child. It is eerie how empty a city can feel when the forces that defined its miseries and delights are removed, leaving only scars. Everywhere you look, the physical remnants are minor, but the emotional weight is enormous. The destroyed dens, the boarded windows, the empty streets, they speak of more than policy or reform. They speak of generations reshaped, families broken, a culture forced to pivot violently from indulgence to denial. You can almost hear the faint echo of laughter, of coughing, of quiet deals made in smoke-filled rooms, and you shiver at the intimacy of these absences. You pass a market where older men sell tea in woven baskets, their hands steady but their eyes distant. They remember the rhythms of the old empire, the cycle of addiction and profit, of foreign greed and imperial weakness. You catch fragments of conversation, a story of a grandfather, a warning about temptation, a lament for the silver lost to pipes instead of grain. Even the simplest interactions carry the weight of history, like stones left on a grave. You walk on, past courtyards and canal banks, and notice that the scars of opium are not just in empty buildings. They are in the rhythm of the city itself. The economy, once vibrant with trade, has slowed. Communities, once bound together by shared rituals, have fractured. Families rebuilt themselves, yes, but in the careful, cautious way people rebuild after trauma, brick by brick, habit by habit, trust by trust. You reach a high terrace and look down on the city as evening settles. The light is soft, forgiving, but the shadows are long. You realize that even without smoke in the air, the city still remembers. Every alley, every fallen tile, every empty doorway is a whisper of the empire's greatest addiction, a reminder that some ghosts never fully leave. And in that quiet, you understand. The opium is gone, but the empire's memory of it is permanent. It lingers in the streets, in the people, in the very air you breathe. The past is invisible, yet omnipresent, shaping everything without a sound. The smoke is gone, the scars remain. You stand in the ruins of what was once the most magnificent empire on earth, and wonder how it all went so sideways. The forbidden city glimmers faintly under the sun, its lacquered roofs still proud but hollow, like a smile stretched over teeth that have long since rotted. You know the story everyone tells, opium, opium, opium. But as you walk through the streets, past temples and markets and silent canals, you realize it wasn't a single flower that brought the empire low. It was the subtle art of being spectacularly wrong in ways that seemed entirely reasonable at the time. You watch a bureaucrat shuffle papers, ink staining his fingers, completely convinced that stamping more decrees will hold the world together. Taxes rise, grain rots. Silver flows to foreign pockets faster than anyone can count. You think about the opium wars and the treaties and the foreign powers with their perfectly polished boots, and it's easy to blame the poppy. But really, it's arrogance. The kind that convinces an empire that traditions will always protect it, that no navy from across the sea can disrupt centuries of rituals, that the world outside the walls is somehow irrelevant. You pass a tea house and hear the faint echoes of debates you'll never witness. Reformers insisting on modern factories and modern armies, realists shaking their heads, muttering about manpower and logistics, and nappers the majority waiting for a problem they can't see to blow over. Every small choice, every polite dismissal of foreign advice, every insistence that the old ways were perfect, they all stacked into a silent avalanche. Walking through the corridors of an empty academy, you notice the students' desks covered in dust. They were taught Confucian texts, memorizing poetry and morals, while the rest of the world was building steam engines and rifles. Ignorance, Not stupidity, just a quiet, comfortable ignorance that felt safe until it wasn't. You see it in the architecture, in the canal locks that can't handle modern trade, in the streets that curve like lazy rivers instead of straight lines for efficiency. The empire was brilliant in art, literature, and ceremony, but increasingly irrelevant in the matters that mattered. You cross a bridge where merchants once counted silver for opium, sugar, and silk. It's not just the drugs you notice, it's the inertia, the way every decision is made with hands washed clean of consequence. Policies favor tradition over practicality. Wars are fought too late, reforms too small, concessions too many. The opium just happened to be profitable enough to expose every flaw, every weakness, every miscalculation. You think about the emperors and the empresses, the officials who made laws in ink but ignored the currents of reality. They didn't see that maintaining power wasn't just about silk robes and rituals. It was about understanding change, about being awake while the world shifted beneath your feet. You realize that the collapse wasn't dramatic in the cinematic sense. It was quiet, bureaucratic, painfully meticulous. Every misstep was a brick in the wall that would eventually cage the empire, not a cannonball tearing it apart. And yet, you can't ignore the human cost. Millions caught in wars, in famines, in the haze of addiction, their lives twisted by forces both natural and manufactured. Arrogance and ignorance may have built the walls, but the empire's people paid for every inch of its stubborn pride. History whispers through alleys, markets, and empty dens that the real enemy wasn't opium. It was the invisible, everyday decisions made by people convinced they were doing the right thing. You stand on a terrace overlooking the city. As evening drapes the sky in bruised purples and golds, you understand at last. The poppy was a symptom. The empire's ruin was not sudden. It was slow, procedural, and impeccably polite. It was arrogance, ignorance, and 1,000 tiny decisions made with very clean hands. And in that clarity, you almost laugh. Almost.